And welcome to tonight's special edition of the One Hood Power Hour. I am your co-host, Kahari Mosley, here with my illustrious co-host, Miracle Jones. How you doing, Miracle?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Kahari?
Doing well. 36 days out. So we're getting down to the nitty gritty. We have a very special guest this evening who's going to be with us for the entire show. State Representative Summer Lee, the Democratic nominee for Congress. But before we get to our special guest, we do have a few headlines to go over. First, we do want to send our condolences to the family of State Supreme Court Justice Max Baer, who passed away over the weekend. So that's definitely, been big news throughout the state of Pennsylvania, but we definitely want to send our condolences to the Bear family. And definitely, is going to be a huge loss for the judicial community, not only around the state, but obviously here in the Pittsburgh area where he is from. But so what other political news do we have out there, Miracle?
Yes, and following along with the conversation around judiciary, we know today was the first day that Justice Ketanji Brown sat and heard hearings at the United States Supreme Court. So this was the first time an African American woman has sat on the Supreme Court. So that was a historic day today. And as Kari was saying, with the unexpected passing, that has also created a new Chief Justice. So for the first time in Pennsylvania's history, a woman will now serve as Chief Justice. And for Pennsylvania, this is the oldest serving Supreme State Court in the United States history. So it is a pretty big deal on the judiciary side of things. However, we've been talking a lot about, women and what this election means for women. Since the overturning of Roe, and talking about like how women are coming out, how women are protesting. And we would be remiss in talking about any issues related to women without bringing up what's going on in Iran and Afghanistan. In the region of the world, women and girls and their allies have been protesting for almost 2 weeks for the right to choose and have access to education, have access to employment, have access to decide what they would like to have on their bodies, what they would like to wear. And so this is something that the world is paying attention to, just because there is a lot of violence going on against women. And so as we have these conversations, make sure we understand what's happening here domestically is also happening globally. And it's very important that we take time just to understand that all of our rights and our battles and our fights are linked. And so that is something that is of importance, because as people may know, there has been a threat to use sanctions against Iran. There's ongoing discussions about how involved the U.S. should be in Afghanistan. And those are, of course, two issues that people who are in Congress will have to vote on. So it will be related to the topics at hand, but it is something we did want to make sure we address, because there was a protest here in Pittsburgh over the weekend, and it just begins to show you that the global is local. Back to you, Kahari.
Thank you for that, Miracle. And jumping to the Pennsylvania Senate race and the governor's race, a recent poll came out by Franklin and Marshall, a very reputable polling outfit, and they had the race within 3 points, with John Fetterman with a 3-point lead. And in the governor's race, it had Josh Shapiro with a pretty comfortable 14-point lead. But, we know not always to trust polls and to take polls with a grain of salt. But that is the latest numbers, from, two of the most watched races in the country, Miracle.
Yeah, this race, this whole entire election is coming down to turnout. A lot of these races are closer than what a lot of people have predicted, going off of how people are now so invested in and involved in electoral politics, different than in the years past. And so it's really interesting to see what the polling numbers are showing. Again, we know that there's always a limit to polls, whether it's people who are limited to only talking to people who have house phones, or limited to people who don't have robocall block technology on their cell phones. These polls do indicate how what we should be looking at. But again, we know these polls don't vote, people do, and so it's very incumbent that people make sure they are registered to vote. In Pennsylvania, the voting deadline is October 24th, and that people show up, on election day if they're voting in person, or by election day if they're voting by mail.
Thank you for that, Miracle. And sticking with the Pennsylvania Senate race, Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman also had a rally in Pittsburgh over the weekend. Kennedy, who definitely has, uh, you know, um, due to the unfortunate situation, of suffering a stroke right before the primary, has had a you know kind of a gap between the campaigning that happened in the primary and his campaigning in the fall. Very recently got back on the campaign trail. He had a rally in Pittsburgh, like I said, this weekend. Our special guest, Summer Lee, was one of the speakers, as well as Mayor Gainey. And I guess this is a sign, that John Fetterman, over the course of the next month, the final month of the campaign, looks like he is going to be more active and getting out to events. Particularly as what was a pretty sizable lead, in the summertime, now has become a much closer race, and it looks like even within the Republican Party, a lot of the establishment forces seem to be turning support away from Doug Mastriano and pouring in all their support over Dr. Oz, looking at he may be, the more viable choice, when maybe in the summertime, the opposite view, was taken by many Republicans, and it looked like the Oz campaign was floundering, and it just shows you how quickly, in the course of a campaign cycle, things can change and the whole scenario can change. Miracle, any thoughts about how this Pennsylvania Senate race seems to have really got to become a tight race, when over the summer it kind of looked like it might be a comfortable ride for Lieutenant Governor Fetterman?
Yeah, this Senate race is one of the most competitive races in the nation, also one of the most expensive races in the nation. And unfortunately, due to Lieutenant Governor's stroke, it did create an avenue for Oz to make up on the campaign trail, to do more engagement, to talk to more people. And again, it shows that we do have to have a conversation about how we are engaging people who are living with disabilities, and making sure that the reflective democracy that we're building is more inclusive. But as we're seeing, it is about turnout, it is about engagement. People need to be able to engage and talk to and ask questions of elected officials and candidates. And because Oz has been able to do that, he's been able to come down with some of the numbers. Again, he was also a person who had high visibility, high name recognition, two things that every candidate really needs when they're running, in addition, to resources, financial, and having people come out and canvass. And so it was always going to be a competitive race. And as Dr. Oz and Lieutenant Governor Fetterman have a debate in the future, it's even going to become more competitive. But it is great to see that people are really involved and invested in these races with so much happening around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. From freedom, from my point of view, what I saw what I see in the Pennsylvania Senate race, and I talked about this with John Delano on KDKA last week, was that the Oz campaign, I think, has been very successful at taking the focus off of Dr. Oz in the campaign. I think for you know late spring and most of the summer, the Fetterman campaign was very successful at keeping the focus kind of being on offense, keeping Dr. Oz on the defensive. And then I think there was some unforced errors by the Oz campaign as well that created, a lot of negative attention. But it seems like over the last month, they seem to have righted the ship. And now it seems like they're back, on offense. And you see Lieutenant Governor, Fetterman trying to get back on offense. And I think that's part of, the kind of uptick in public events, the uptick in activity, and I'm sure, as his, recovery continues, over the next month, I would suspect to see him, being more active, obviously following doctor's orders, but being more active. But I think, I felt like most of the summer, so much of the conversation, was about, the mishaps and the missteps of the Oz campaign and just the, how poorly, the campaign was going, as well as how successfully, the Fetterman campaign was able to use social media, during the lieutenant governor's, recovery, to really drive a message home, about, Dr. Oz. But now it seems that, this thing has become way more competitive than we thought it might be in July, or September. So, like you said, we'll be continuing to keep our eyes, on the Senate race. And lastly, before we get to our special guest, recent polling came out in the Chris Deluzio race, and it's an internal poll from the Deluzio campaign. And it shows a very a narrow lead, a 4 or 5 point lead for Mr. Deluzio in a very, very close watch race. Miracle, we've talked a lot about the amount of television ads being poured, television advertising money being poured into the race for the 17th congressional district between Jeremy Schaefer and Chris Deluzio. Any other particular thoughts about that very, very closely watched race in the Pittsburgh suburbs?
Yeah, I think it shows again these are such competitive races and how important it is for ad spending. A lot of that margin of error is because there have been a lot of negative attack ads on Chris Deluzio going on for weeks now. And so a lot of people have been talking about like, how is this election going to be different than past elections? What is going to be the impact coming? This is the first real election cycle after COVID-19, after these pandemics. What is going to be changed? And it still seems like those targeted ads, those repetitive ads, accusing people, even if it is not as accurate as a lot of people would think, these ads really do play a part on reducing how competitive these races are. And so I think it's great that polling is being done. It shows that this is a race that is winnable for either candidate, and that people really do have to get out to vote in this election if they want to see a lot of these seat changes happen and occur.
So again, Miracle, that's going to be another race we'll be watching closely. And next Monday night, our special guest will be Chris Deluzio, the Democratic nominee for Congress in Pennsylvania's 17th district. So we'll be very much looking forward to that conversation. But now we could look forward to the conversation we're about to have with a very inspirational leader, a history maker already, and is on the precipice of continuing, that history of making history, on a pathway to become not only, a very impactful, political leader, but, a historic figure in Western Pennsylvania politics. And that would be none other than State Representative Summer Lee, the Democratic nominee for Congress in the 12th district. We're so excited to have her join us for a special meet and greet, what we're calling a special conversation over the next 40 some minutes. So welcome to the Power Hour, Representative Lee.
Hey y'all, I had to get off of mute. I guess I probably should have
No,
prepared
that's all,
for that one.
no, that's all good.
And
Thank you so much, for joining us. First of all, just tell us, how you're doing. What is the state, of the life of Summer Lee, months after the primary, now in the home stretch. of this campaign that's had so many ups and downs, and $5 million was spent against you in the primary. You were able to overcome that. What is your perspective after going over that mountain, and being so close to the final destination? Though we want to tell everyone that it's not a sure bet. There's still an election, so definitely don't pop your champagne until November 9th or 10th, depending on how long takes them to count the votes. And I know with the mail-in votes, sometimes they have to wait. But with that long introduction, tell us how you're doing.
Yeah, I'm all right. You're really right. It has definitely been a lot of ups and downs. I was with you all. It feels like we were together years ago doing our first forum for this race back in the primary. A lot of people, and this is my first time, right, having to really do a general, right, to really have to run. I usually represent a district that's a deeply blue district, and this one is also still a Democratic district, but that still means that we got to hit the ground running. We're having to run through the finish line, right? A lot of folks are asking us, is it in the bag? And as you mentioned, no, we still have a race, right? We're running against a gentleman who shares the exact same name as the outgoing rep. So that's a really unique challenge that kind of comes right off of, a Hollywood, right, a movie. So really just trying to deal with that, making sure that voters know, that this race is happening, know what's happening up and down the ballot, using every bit of organizing resource that we have, so that we're turning out the vote and that we're really getting information to voters so that they can make the choices for themselves, right? And not kind of rely on disinformation, not rely on tricks or anything like that. So we're still running through, ready for November 9th.
Thank you. I know you said you mentioned the race. We would be remiss to say, not to add, that we did reach out to everyone who is a registered candidate in this race, and we're talking to Summer because she is the only one who responded and felt like it was important enough to come down and talk to us. So that is one of the reasons why we're having this forum. A lot of times people say, well, it's not a forum if everyone's not involved. But if people don't respond and don't think that the vote is important or the voice is important, they don't show up. And so with that, like I said, you've been busy running, talking to people, navigating. Like you said, this is the first time you're doing a general election, so you have to talk to even more conservative voters. So what has that process been like, and how has your messaging been able to resonate with people who are traditionally not the average Summerlee voter?
Yeah, we were really intentional. We've been really intentional about reaching out to voters who aren't in, what we would consider kind of our typical base, doesn't necessarily make up our base, or isn't in the geographic area that I'm already in with my 34th legislative district in the state house. So we've actually been going out into Westmoreland. We've been going down into the South Hills, Bethel Park and Upper St. Clair. We've been going into parts of the city, right, that are traditionally more conservative, because all of those areas are places where we can get folks, right? What we saw in the primary was that those nasty attack ads that folks were getting, right, wall-to-wall coverage that they were getting on their TV screens, their radio, and the mailboxes, right? What we saw was the folks who that resonated most with were the people who were least likely to know me, right? Least likely to know us, to know what we're about, know what our political movement is about, right? Some of that was geographic and some of that, is demographic. So when we go out and we talk to people, we haven't really needed to change the messaging. We know, and we knew in our primary, right, that the message that we're delivering, one for working class folks, fighting for unions and a living wage, right? Fighting for housing affordability, making sure that we're fighting for affordable public schools, right? These issues, healthcare, environmental justice, these are issues that resonate everywhere we go in this district. And we have been to every corner of the district, right? But what we're up against is the disinformation, right? We're up against people who are saying, oh, well, it's not just about environmental justice, but, what about all the jobs we're going to lose, right? Counteracting that with the idea that we don't have to choose between jobs and our environment, right? In the midst of, one of the worst hurricane seasons on record, right? Counteracting some of the nasty things or the disinformation they hear about crime and criminal legal reform, right? Counteracting those things. When we get to those folks and we share the message, it resonates, but we just have to make sure that we are getting to those folks and that we're not leaving them behind.
Thank you for that. And from a like a policy standpoint, as you kind of look at the landscape, 36 days, out from the election, what do you think, are the most important issues that you need to be touching on over the next 36 days, as you come down the finish?
Yeah. I mean, obviously the first issue for me personally as a candidate is right, is letting people know that, Mike Doyle's not Mike Doyle. So don't vote for Mike Doyle. That's the first issue for me. But when I think about policy issues and the issues that have been really resonating with voters, it's a number of things. Obviously, you all touched early on about, the post kind of Roe United States that we live in right now. And we know that just nationwide, but Pennsylvania is no different. The 12th district is no different. We have seen increase in registration amongst women and birthing folks and our allies. And we know that we want to turn out folks. We know we want to empower those folks, that population, so that we are taking steps to address not just what happened at the Supreme Court, but also to protect Pennsylvania from what can be if we lose this governor's race, right? Or if we don't win seats in the state house, right? So doing that work, talking a lot about abortion care and access and reproductive justice has been big. In Pittsburgh and our region, infrastructure is obviously still an issue. Housing justice is a growing issue that we're seeing all over the region. So those are big issues. For me, healthcare is always an issue. But really, we're just touching on, the points that we always talk about, right? Racial justice, economic justice, environmental justice. Those are issues that, I think we talk about in and out of season, right? I talk about the in and out of election season. So we're going to do that for the next 36 days, just like we've been doing it for the last 5 years.
And so I have a question just about the emotional toll it takes as a candidate, because you're running and you have been endorsing, supporting, showing up for people up and down ballot. But it's no secret that a lot of these individuals did not show up for you when you're running in your primary, and did not really condemn some of the attack acts that were coming out against you. And so why do you feel it's so important to show up in these moments? And like, how are you able to show up in these moments? Because it seems like that would be like a heavy lift to go through.
That is, no, I love that, Miracle. That's actually one of the realest questions. A lot of people think about us as, political candidates as like machines, right? As if we're not humans with emotions. Every day when I see ads on TV, I know that my nephew sees them, right? I know that my grandma sees them, and it's rough. And also just dealing with a lot of politicians, right, who really aren't welcoming, who aren't open. That's nonpartisan, right? Thinking about people who are worried about the movement that we're building, worried about seeing, progressive Black women ascending. That's a very real thing to deal with. But I want to be very clear about, who do I show up for when I show up for candidates up and down the ballot? And don't get me wrong. There's a lot of times where I am showing up for very good candidates, right? We have good folks running, at the state level, good folks running up and down. But the reality is that I'm showing up for us. I'm showing up for my community. I'm showing up for my constituents, because however I feel about individuals, right, in any election cycle, however I feel about individuals does not transcend the needs of my community. And the reality is that we have very real threats. And we know that when fascism reaches our shores, right, when whatever is happening, insurrection, white supremacy, as those things grow, we know who's going to be impacted first. I know that it's going to be my community that's impacted first, right? If we lose abortion access in Pennsylvania, I know that Black women and femmes, Black women, non-binary folks and birthing folks will die, right? I know that. I know that, if we don't address our housing crisis, right, it'll be poor and marginalized folks, trans and queer folks who are on the streets, right? So the reality is that there are wider implications, and we have to continue to show up. I don't really like the analogy of like, oh, it's the lesser of two evils. I like to play strategic, right? We have short-term goals and we have long-term goals. My job is to always make sure that we're building long-term. So any election cycle, when we come up on November and we don't like who we see, we're still going to make the best decision, the best strategic decision for community. And we're going to work like hell to organize, and we're going to model what organizing looks like, so that come April, at this year, because it come May and then April in our next primary, right, we're making sure that we are ready and on top of it. And we're sending folks and candidates are now interacting with us differently. So I do it for us. It's not unselfish, but it's also selfish.
Thanks so much for that. You know, being able, and this is a question we've asked a number of the candidates have been able to join us. When Josh Shapiro was on the Sunday night sit down a few weeks ago, we asked him, this question as well as someone who's in the arena. Not only as an elected official, but also as a candidate, for federal office. What, is your message, to the viewers and the voters about how important, this election and what was truly at stake. 'Cause I think, folks are working their 9 to 5, living their lives, dealing with the immediate things that pull your attention as they should, for folks, that are, working 9 to 5s and taking care of their family and taking their kid to basketball practice and football games and stuff like that. But for those of us who are right in the middle of the maelstrom, particularly like yourself, what is your message for folks about what's truly at stake in this election and why is it so important?
Yeah. I mean, we hear it a lot. We hear it over and over and over that this election cycle is going to be one of the most important. I've not lived through every election cycle, but I know, because I work with these folks. I go to Harrisburg every day and I work with folks on the other side of the aisle. I know what their intentions are. I know what their intentions are for our community, for our nation. And once you know that, you cannot go back, right? When you know that, you can't take it lightly, because they are enacting their plans. They've showed us their cards, right? If we're playing spades, they've shown us the hand, and they've been really intentional. They've been very honest and upfront about what they want to do, which means that we know what's at stake, right? We know that voting rights and voting access is at stake, right? We've only since the pandemic, and believe it or not, our new voting laws in Pennsylvania didn't have anything to do with the pandemic, but they did benefit us throughout it. So early voting, mail-in voting, all of those things were new things that we had to fight for. That was Republican bills, and they're already trying to roll them back because they saw who turns out to vote when we have increased access and better access to the ballot, right? We know that if certain folks win the governor's race, then they are very vocal about electing folks or appointing folks who will be very open about stealing an election. Free and fair elections are, at stake right now. Abortion care is literally at stake. Like in Pennsylvania, we are not necessarily a safe blue state. If we don't have a Democratic governor, we can lose abortion care in January. Even with a Democratic governor now, we can lose it in May if they put it and send it to the ballot for a constitutional amendment. We have to stay vigilant, right? They are coming for us. When we think about those parents who are, they're worried about putting food on the table. They're worried about their rent. They're worried about their utilities. They're worried about their kids getting to school and going to school. Our schools are on the ballot. Whether or not we're funding schools in our communities at the rate that we're supposed to be, right? Whether or not your kids have sports programs, they have access to the arts and sports programs, that's all on the ballot in Pennsylvania. So there's a lot that's Pennsylvania specific, and then there's a lot that's nationally specific. So when I think about what's at stake, I think about whether or not we are going to have workers' protection, right? Do you get an increase in your pay? Do you get safe working conditions? Do you get to unionize? That's at stake. Do you get to get an abortion and get access to care that you need from your medical providers? That's at stake. Can you afford healthcare? That's at stake. All of those things are happening every single election cycle, but these ones that we are facing right now are so critical because of the moves that the Republican Party made before January 6th, but really at January 6th and since.
Thank you for that. And you talked a lot about the legislation that's at stake. If you win, you would be like a freshman congressperson and, assigned different committees. Is there a committee that you hope to be placed on? And is there some legislation that you would look forward either to introducing or co-sponsor?
Yeah, the committee situation and trying to figure out what committee to be on has been one of the most complicated conversations that I've discovered. At the state level, I'm on 3 committees. I've actually been on 5 committees in my 4 years, and I'm on 3 right now. I'm on Judiciary Committee, which has been one of the most important committees to me. It was the one that I fought for. It's where we do a lot of work around the criminal legal system. It's where we do a lot of defense as progressives to stop a lot of bills that would erode protections, particularly for marginalized populations in the criminal legal system. Is where we would deal with policing and so much more. So judiciary has been really important to me. I've also been on education and health. And those are the things that are a really big interest of mine, and kind of figuring out how that fits in at the congressional level is different, right? Because a lot of freshmen don't get their first choices. So, for instance, a really big committee, and one in which our current rep will be leaving, is the Energy and Commerce committee, but that's not one that freshmen typically get on at all. So it's one that you kind of have to position yourself with over a number of terms. In fact, I believe it took Congressman Doyle 10 years to get on that committee. So judiciary and that work that you do and that we are doing around the criminal legal system as progressives is really important to me. Healthcare, obviously there's a single payer healthcare bill that already exists. There's a lot of legislation that already exists that we have a small cohort of politicians who are waiting for folks to come in, right? They're waiting for reinforcements to come. So I'm excited to be able, if I'm honored to serve as some reinforcements on a lot of things, whether it be healthcare, whether it be issues around paid sick and family leave, workers' protections, the voting rights, these things. I'm excited to be reinforcements around those things, but I'm also excited to figure out what are those Pittsburgh, Western PA specific things that we're going to need. And I think that that's what this time period is about, right? Is meeting with those stakeholders now and figuring out what is the best committee, because you kind of get one committee that is your passion, and then you get another that is like, what does your region need? And really thinking about what is our region's need right now as we kind of figure out what is that second one we'll go for.
Thank you for that. Is there any, other specific, areas of federal policy that you're really interested, looking at, whether it's transportation, or you mentioned, the energy, and the environment, is there anything else in that portfolio that you want to tackle that you feel like the congressional, seat would be a unique place, for you to really make the most impact?
Yeah, when I think about just the influence and the opportunities at the federal level, obviously, that comes with, a lot of coalition building. It comes with a lot of patience, but, environmental racism is something that I kind of stumbled into, not by education, really not even by interest, but it's something that I stumbled into because of necessity, right? As somebody who grew up in the Mon Valley, and really thinking about what does turning a corner look like for communities like ours. And we have a lot of Western Pennsylvania communities like that, right? Communities that were former steel towns, former industry towns, that as industry shut down, collapsed, or left, right? A lot of those communities were kind of left with the vestiges of what does that look like. And that is why I always talk about policy as cyclical, as interconnected, because in our area, right, when we think about environmental justice, some of the worst air quality in the nation, we know that Black and brown folks and poor folks are more likely to live by those environmental hazards, whether it be water infrastructure, whether it be air pollution. But that also goes into housing justice, right? As these industries left and as jobs left, right? Communities like mine, North Braddock, these Mon Valley communities, a lot of them were left, right, with a lot of blight, a lot of just a lot of emptiness and not a lot of resources and a lot of opportunities to grow and to build and to turn that corner. So what are those new energies, those clean energies that we need to be investing in, that we need to be really lifting up, that can help our region, and not just the city, right? Not just that area that has already been able to turn into eds and meds, right? But some of those other communities that are on the outskirts that haven't been able to turn the corner, right? So those are that's a really big issue that I'm really interested in. It's a really big one, obviously. A lot of folks at the national level, we talk about a Green New Deal, right? What does it look like to have a just transition, and recognizing kind of the inevitability that we must transition as an economy, but doing that in such a way that doesn't leave our workers behind, right? Doesn't leave workers who are working explicitly in the industry, right? In fracking, in pipelines, making sure that we are getting those folks reskilled, upskilled, right? So that they are not being left, but instead are actually really kind of driving that transition, driving a just transition, because there is no just transition without the workers, but also without those frontline communities, because what we're not going to do is say that those Black and brown communities that are on the front lines also don't get an equal opportunity, equal say to drive that transition. So that's really big for me.
And you said you kind of learned a lot more about environmental race in the past few years. You know that you're just like one person. You don't know everything. It's impossible. How do you go about learning about different issues? How do you learn about, opposing points of view? And how do you seek to engage and have meaningful conversation around differences? Because I know it's so easy to just to be siloed and segmented, but obviously you can't. So how do you navigate those differences?
Yeah. To address, just to start with, right? I feel like when you come from what is, I would say, the marginalized position, and you know what, in this country, Black progressives, it's a marginalized position. It's very hard. It's a lot harder to kind of live in a silo than it is for folks who don't recognize how widespread the popularity is around our issues. So I actually know what the opposition thinks. I know very well what opposition thinks around issues spanning education to environmental racism to, whether or not we're going to, forgive student debts, right? We know what their position is because it enjoys mainstream movement, right? It enjoys the media pushing it out. It enjoys popularity from the politicians on both sides, right? So their positions are very well known. Working through them and helping them to helping to expand the realm of what's possible with them has been really an approach that I've taken in my last 4 years, right? And as it turns, how do we learn about positions? I'm happy you said that, Miracle, because I always say no one politician can know everything, and they're not supposed to. They're not even necessarily supposed to be the smartest in the room. They need to be smart enough to recognize that we need to bring more people into the room. So going and finding stakeholders, and not just traditional stakeholders, but impacted peoples, impacted communities, people whose expertise may not be titles, may not be a few letters behind their names, but it may be in lived experience. It may even be work experience, right? Making sure that we are also bringing them in is how we build on our knowledge base, is how we make sure that we have a wide enough perspective, right? And that we're not limiting ourselves to our own perspective and our own experience, because we can't afford to do that in policy work. It's important to recognize that, your perspective is not the only one, even if it is right? And even if it is where we need to be moving to. But it's always a good practice to strengthen that with, other viewpoints and vantage points. So that's what we've sought to do. That's what I've sought to do through kind of co-governing, through making sure that we are organizing on the ground, by making sure that we're holding forums or even just being present, right, on social media, where so many people get mad at progressives for being social media present. But the reality is that we're meeting people where they are, and we're meeting them where they spend their time, and they have their guard down when they talk to us, so that they're actually a little bit more open and transparent, and we can be vice versa the same way. So that's how I've kind of approached that.
And I know, in your platform, one of the issues that you talk about a lot is obviously an issue that's been, covered a lot, in recent years with many, just heartbreaking, incidents, and that issue is gun violence. We were at a time when, there is a growing kind of small group of folks who really seem hell-bent on wanting to take policy back to the very early 90s, the kind of lock them up, kind of mentality in response to incidents that are happening, here in Western Pennsylvania and around the country, pretty much, in line with, like a kind of rise in incidents we've seen as a response to the pandemic, at least from my point of view. Could you talk a little bit about, why it is so important for you to take the approach that you take, and as a potential federal official, what types of things do you want to do to leverage the federal government, to address, these systemic issues, that result in a number of social ills one of those being violence, as opposed to the old school, traditional kind of lock folks up, throw away the key response, to when these incidents happen in our community and other communities around the region.
Yep. Yeah, Kahari, I mean, you're exactly right? They're systemic, which means that we have to address them systemically. I can tell you, just even as a member of the Judiciary Committee, and that's precisely where we deal with this at the state level. It's been a challenge because people want you in politics to go for not even just always the easy solution, but sometimes they want you to go for the thing that looks nicest. We'll cover up bad policy with flowery words, or we'll name things after people, and we'll make emotional policy that if you dig just a little deeper below the surface, that it will have a disparate impact, particularly on those folks who are already far more endangered in our criminal legal system. So right now, we're seeing that drumbeat again. We're hearing that drumbeat again of politicians, the media, and people throughout sectors, right? Not just in government, but throughout our society, kind of reverting back to that instinct that when we see crime rising, that we must kind of revert to our fear mongering. And that means that we have to go right back to those tough on crime, lock them up policies. The reality is that, listen, the United States is already per capita the incarceration capital of the world. There is no country in the world that incarcerates its citizens more than the United States. And we're really going to have to ask ourselves something. Do we truly believe that Americans are more prone to criminality? Or could it be that we're just not addressing the social determinants and the root causes of crime? And I think that right now, politically, it's always so much easier to put a Band-Aid on things, to dress it up and make it nice, than it is to actually invest in real solutions. Because investing in real solutions means looking at a system, our system of government, and really even being real about whether it allows us to invest in solutions. Because the solutions to crime and this rash of crime, it's not mandatory minimums. We have empirical data that shows us that mandatory minimums do not deter crime. We know that over-policing does not deter crime in the ways in which we're going to hear folks say in their ads, right? We know that locking folks up does not deter crime, right? Because if that were the case, then we wouldn't have to continue to do so. What does deter crime, right, is addressing poverty. It's addressing a lack of resources going into our schools. It's addressing the lack of opportunities for jobs that pay a living, family-sustaining wage, right? It's creating opportunities. It's addressing those cyclical issues, right? Because we know that if you are, poor, Black and brown, you live in communities that are locked in, communities that don't have transportation in and out, communities that are near that environmental hazard that makes us sick, that then makes us miss school. We know that our schools are underfunded, right? Those are all things that we could do as a government at every level to address crime, right? They are not short-term solutions. They are not campaign slogans, but they are actually this medicine. It's remedy. And we know that it would pay dividends. But to get politicians, and that brings us back to the beginning when we were talking about how do you deal with the ads? How do you deal with the money that was spent against me, right? When I think about the money in politics and the ways in which it keeps politicians in a chokehold, that is so real because politicians answer to the NRA, right? We have to answer to the pharmaceutical companies. We got to answer to corporations instead of answering to people. And that keeps us from being able to do the things that are right instead of the things that are easy. Because if you vote against that tough on crime bill, then you can expect somebody's going to put $1 million into your next race. If you vote against this or that, you can expect that money. And then what that does is that keeps a constant stream of fear mongering on our TVs and our radio that then convinces our community that knows better, right? That, well, maybe this is the only way. And that's what we are up against right now. That's truly what we're up against. So supporting candidates that don't fall for that is so important right now. Running candidates that aren't pro-carceral is so important, right? The Democrats and the Republicans are all going to jump on our movement, on the movement for Black lives that is said, right? We've seen police violence and we want to nip that in the bud. We want to end that, right? We've seen tough on crime policy. We've seen the crime bill. We want to end that. And they're now punishing us for speaking out against something that they also know doesn't work. So we have to continue to speak up against that and organize around that, because if we let up, right, this will be the narrative that prevails.
Thank you for that. And talking about lighting up, one of the things that would make you different than a lot of your counterparts, if you're elected, the majority of the legislation that you're debating about would impact you, whether it is Social Security, whether it is student loans, whether it even is the right to healthcare access. And I know a lot of times you have said that people closest to the pain and the trauma issues need to be in the room. And why is it that you want to be in these rooms? What are you bringing, to the proverbial electoral table that can make a difference?
Well, the first thing that hopefully I'm doing is I'm taking the table out of their rooms and bringing it to our streets and bringing it to our communities, because, we can keep waiting for them to make room at a table that was never built to fit us. And that's the first problem that we have, right? But I can just tell you in my time as a state rep, what I've seen is so many bills, and not even just bills, right? When we are, directing monies, appropriations, grants, funding, right? When we think about who gets grant money and who doesn't, it's usually the friend of the guy who's holding the seat. And they continue to give to the people that they know, because that's who they know. They always go back to the folks that they know, which means that they're always taking care of the communities that take care of them, and vice versa. And that always leaves a cycle of the same people being left out over and over. And when we write bills and we see legislation, I can't tell y'all how many times I've seen bills, and I talked about it, right? Bills that look good, sound good, but I know would have a disparate impact on the Black community. I know that if we vote for that bill that sounds good, for instance, I remember when we had the constitutional amendment around Marsy's Law, which is an incredibly important issue, right? Protecting victims, making sure that victims are taken care of, make sure that they're able to access, court hearings and a fair trial and all that, right? Taking care of victims is incredibly important. But there's a reason why we have a constitutional protection for those who are accused of crimes, right? Because you're not guilty until, the verdict. You're not guilty upon accusation. You have a right to a fair and speedy trial. You have a presumption of innocence. And we know that Black and brown folks, particularly Black and brown men, are less likely to enjoy a presumption of innocence. And this was one piece of legislation that would erode that presumption of innocence. But because it wasn't necessarily folks from the community who were advising, sounding the alarm was very difficult, because if this is not your lived experience, it's not top of mind. It's not something that you're thinking about, right? You're just thinking about the benefits and not, what some of the disadvantages are, what some of the harms can be. It's harder to see the harms when you aren't living and experiencing, right, and navigating the communities that are experiencing those harms. So I can't tell you all how many times, sometimes we like the splashy thing, right? We like the offense. We like to see the bill get across the governor's table or the president's table. But a lot of times we're doing defense. There are a lot of things that we were able to stop because we've lived it, because we were like, that's not going to help our community. That's going to hurt this community. We need to think about that differently. Like, we need to come at this from a different angle. Let's strengthen this bill before we bring it, right? That's the difference that I bring, right? Through my lived experience navigating as a Black woman who grew up working class, poor, right? As somebody who grew up, in the shadow of a polluter, right? Somebody who grew up in public schools that are under-resourced, right? You carry that with you, and you fight for it differently because it's your issue, because it's your family's issue, your community's issues. It's easier to give up the fight when you're not going to be the person who feels it. It's easier to go home at night and say, well, let's just pack up, let's do it tomorrow, because you're not going home to the issue. You're not going home to the impact. So we have to get more people in office who go home to the impact. And until we eliminate the impact, right? Because that's the ultimate goal, is to eliminate the impact. But until we do that, we can't have a government full of people who think the same way and sound the same way and look the same way and do work the same way. We actually need a government where people approach things differently. We need folks who are going to bring a different viewpoint. And a lot of times we talk about that as if it's a bad thing, right? Progressives are bad because they don't do things the way we do things. You're not supposed to do it the same way. We need folks who are going to be committed to doing things differently because things haven't worked this way. So I think that it's about time that we get a little bit of grace to try some things our way, right? To bring up some issues that we care about and really be able to fight for it the way we know how to fight for it, with the same latitude that other folks have been able to enjoy as they've governed.
Thank you so much. We have only a few minutes left. Can you tell us a little bit about any potential events you have coming up and how folks, can get involved with the campaign before we go into our final comments?
Yes, Corey. Thank you so much for asking. Friends, you can always plug into our campaign. You can follow me on Twitter, Summer for PA. Actually, Summer for PA, at Summer for PA is my Twitter handle. Our website is summerforpa.com. And if you go there, you're able to see all of our links to our events. We have mobilized where you can sign up to come to any of our canvases, fundraisers. Yes, we are still fundraising because it's so important that we be able to put resources into organizing. And then, of course, putting resources into organizing those constituencies and communities that deserve attention and that deserve to have folks knocking on their doors and speaking to them and hearing from them and taking back what they care about. So that's one thing that we're doing. So we do still have fundraisers. We do still knock. We knock every day. We have 36 days, which means that we want to talk to every voter. We want to let them know that this is a race. We want to let them know what we are fighting for. We want to know what they want us to fight for. And we also want to let them know that Mike Doyle's not Mike Doyle. So that is something that we are doing. As we have events come up, we will post them. They'll be on Instagram, they'll be on Twitter, they'll be on Facebook. So we will keep people up in real time because with 36 days left, we're moving towards GOTV and things are going to come up in real time every day. So just plug in with us.
And you were just real quick, and you were recently at an event this weekend. Can you talk a little bit about the event in the Strip District? Because I know a lot of people have been watching, the Senate race closely, not only here but around the country. What was the energy like at that event? Could you give us a kind of a little bit of a rundown of how that event went this past weekend?
Yeah, this past weekend, of course, you touched on a little bit at the beginning of the show. Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman had a rally here in Pittsburgh. Of course, it's a statewide, right? So he could do this rally anywhere. He did it here in Pittsburgh. And, it was a rainy, dreary day. We weren't sure. I mean, we knew that he wasn't going to cancel because the invite said rain or shine. But, we couldn't predict how much it was going to rain. But I'll tell you, folks came out. It was folks who stood out. They were excited. They were energized. And they were pumped up. And they heard from a lot of good folks. We had one of our congressmen coming from California, Ro Khanna. We, of course, had Mayor Gainey. And, anytime Mayor Gainey speaks, it's going to be pure energy, pure passion. So we got a lot of that from them. And really, it's just a reminder that, these races are important, right? This is our 51st seat in the Senate that we're talking about. And we have to go out and get every single vote, right? That 51st vote is going to be the difference between whether or not, right, we are codifying Roe, right? It's going to be the difference between whether or not we are passing a PRO Act to protect our labor and our workers, whether or not we are going to protect the right to vote and expand it. These are all on the line. So we want to make sure that we're sending folks to the Senate. It's whether or not we confirm judges, right? That's how we got Judge Ketanji Brown, who went in today. Right. So we want to make sure that we are building on the momentum that we have. So it was good to see all the Democratic candidates out coming together. Right. We are going to work together at the end of the day. We're going to vote up and down the ticket because, we vote for our most marginalized. We vote for the most vulnerable community member that we have. And we have to protect that most vulnerable community member from Dr. Oz and from Doug Mastriano. So that's what we're doing. And yeah, I'm partisan, y'all. I can be political.
Oh, no, you're fine. I was about to ask you our standard wrap-up question. You're doing a lot. You said less than 36 days, a lot of pressure. How are you dealing with it, and what is bringing you joy?
I feel like the last time you asked me this, I had the same blank stare. Dealing with it.
Standard ending.
I know. I wasn't even prepared for it. I'm dealing with it, right? No, the reality is that we're driven by movement. Being a part of this movement has been an honor. I don't take that lightly. maybe hopefully becoming the first Black woman to serve in Congress from Pennsylvania is an honor. And there's a lot of responsibility with that, but there's a lot of joy in breaking barriers and bringing people with me, building out and making sure that we're tearing down gates instead of keeping them. So that gives me a little bit of joy. Other than that, getting naps, sneaking in naps gives me a lot of joy. And as you know, Miracle, I started priming my wall. I have these gentrification gray walls that used to be throughout my entire house. I'm finally getting to the last gray walls because they depress me. So I'm brightening up my house, and I'm really excited to not look out at the gray soon.
Yeah, I want you to shout out that you did all of this painting and decorating behind you. And so I tried to end on a good note, but since you weren't prepared, my question is going to be, if you win in November, someone has to take your seat. What is those conversations like for that? I'm not asking you to endorse anyone, just asking you, what are those conversations looking like?
Yes, y'all. If I win, God willing, if I win this race, that means that there's going to be a vacancy in what I believe has just become the best state house district. Obviously, I'm always going to put on for my state house district, but this district, a lot of people struggle throughout redistricting. Redistricting is a really, really hard process. But the 34th legislative district is a district that's intuitive now, right? We cut out parts of it. We lost some parts of it that never really made sense in the first place. So this district is now going to be what we call minority. I don't really like the word minority, but it's a folk of color opportunity district, right? Which basically means that there's enough Black people in this district that we can reasonably, run candidates who are Black and brown. We can win with women candidates. I was the first Black woman to serve in the state house from Western Pennsylvania. So I'm excited to not be the last. And I would love for there to be more than one. That's a really cool opportunity. But really, the conversations right now are getting the committee people to be committed to a process. This is going to be a special election, which means that the Democratic committee, this is a Democratic seat. It's one of the most Democratic seats in the region. That means that the committee will they'll basically appoint their own nominee. So anybody who is a committee person in the 34th legislative district, that's Braddock, Rankin, North Braddock, Braddock Hills, Forest Hills, Wilkinsburg now, part of Point Breeze, part of Homewood now, Churchill and those areas, you all will get to come to vote and you will get to select the nominee. Because there is no Republican, because there is no real primary, that means that person usually goes on to win. So right now, we really are just making sure that there's a fair process, right? That the people's voices get heard. The committee people are getting tuned in to their neighbors about what their neighbors want. This is a progressive seat. I want this seat to stay progressive. I don't want us to backtrack.
Thank you so much for that, State Representative Summer Lee. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for a very lively and informative conversation. And best of luck the rest of the way. And after November 8th, once folks had a chance to take a breath and hopefully pop some champagne, we'd love to have you back on and talk about, this last month, but now we're gonna let you go, get back to your very, very busy schedule and get back to that last 36 days. But looking forward to talking to you soon again. State Representative Summer Lee, Democratic nominee for Congress in Pennsylvania's 12th district.
Thanks for having me, everyone.
Again, that was Summer Lee, the Democratic nominee. And also my state representative. I am now part of the Point Breeze section that is in the 34th legislative district. So Summer Lee is my state representative for at least a few more months. But that was a very, very, very inspiring conversation. Thanks again to Summer Lee for joining us. Any closing thoughts before we adjourn until this week's Sunday night sit down?
Yeah, I think it's always important that elected officials and candidates have conversations and reach out to people, even if it's not us on our platform. I think it's very important because regardless of whether you like us or not, you still have to represent us when you go to office. And so we will keep reaching out to all of people who are running for office, and give them the opportunity to engage, to talk about their platforms. And while they're running, and we'll ask we have pointed questions, we have conversations, and to us, it's the sharing of information that's very important. So we're very thankful and fortunate that State Rep Summerlee sat down with us this evening. And as a reminder, you have until October 24th to make sure you're registered to vote in the November 8th general election. Also, be remiss talking about voting. Today, Pennsylvania students started their free breakfast program, the universal free breakfast program. So it's so important that people understand that investment in our community comes through the people that we elect to office, to make sure that people are paying attention. And with that, back to you, Kari.
Thanks, Miracle. Yeah, we have a lot of exciting events coming up. Hopefully, if not this coming Sunday night sit down or the next power hour, maybe in 2 weeks, we'll have a lot more to report about the final several weeks before the election. So probably the last 21 days or so, there's going to be a lot of stuff going on. But one thing that we do know is going to happen is next Monday night, we're going to have Chris Deluzio, the Democratic nominee in the 17th House District, which is the Pittsburgh's northern suburbs, and parts of the northern communities beyond the northern suburbs. So we're really excited to have that conversation. And with that, Miracle, do you have any other announcements before we close out this wonderful conversation this evening?
Yes, we'll have some special shows coming up as well. Some really great things are happening out here in southwestern Pennsylvania. But with that, I hope you have a great rest of your evening. Thank you so much, State Rep Summerlee, for sitting down with us. And again, if you've been paying attention to stuff internationally, please make sure you show up and support your local community members who are having to watch their family and friends protest throughout social media. And with that, have a great evening.